I am happy to have four of the authors of our new book today to join in for a Q&A, including the two lead editors, Bill Sietsema, Vice President, Global Regulatory Affairs from Caladrius Biosciences, and Jocelyn Jennings, Vice President, Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance, Mycovia Pharmaceuticals. In addition to Mo Heidaran, Head of Regulatory and Translational Strategy, GC Therapeutics, and Murphy Mao, Senior Regulatory Affairs Manager, CSL Behring, China. Welcome, panel. I'm glad to have you all here today. I wanted to give you a little bit of information about our new book. The book is 240 pages. It's comprised of 17 chapters, in addition to abbreviations, acronyms, a glossary of terms, and an in-depth index. We have a foreword that was produced by Executive Director of Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, Janet Lambert. The book has 25 authors from 11 different countries, and it covers US, Europe, China, Japan, Singapore, Australia, and Canada. The book's available in print and electronic formats, and it's $145 for members and $200 for non-members. And it was just released in April. I'll give you a little bit of what's covered in the book. It has detailed information on unique regulatory frameworks for cell therapy, gene therapy, and tissue engineering in key world markets. The book is divided into three distinct sections. Section 1 contains general information from definitions to unique properties of regenerative medicines. Section 2 discusses special considerations for cell, gene, and tissue engineering, manufacturing concepts, and distribution challenges. And Section 3 covers unique regulatory frameworks in multiple global regions, and also has a chapter on the future of regenerative medicine. So I'd like to get started with a few questions, and I want to start off with Bill. As one of the lead editors of the book, what was your thought process when developing the structure and scope of the book, and what specific chapter topics would be covered?
Oh, thanks, Gloria. Nice introduction. We wanted the book to be global, and we wanted it to cover all disciplines broadly. In other words, manufacturing, pharm tox, and clinical. So we outlined all the various topics, a little bit of brainstorming going on there, and then began searching for authors who could consider these topics from a global perspective.
How did you, Bill, select and recruit authors?
It was difficult. We contacted experts that we knew, and we also asked them who they knew. So we tapped into our network. In addition, RAPS sent out a notice to all members looking for expert authors, and we posted some notes in LinkedIn. In some cases, we did Google searches to see who we could find. We discovered that finding authors with specific expertise and who are willing to write is hard work. And we didn't find authors for all the regions we would have liked. And we had some authors initially agree and then back out later on, leaving us to look for additional authors. So that's a little bit of how we did the process.
I do think that this book is one of the first with reps that's covering different regions that we've never covered before. So that's really wonderful. So I have a question for Jocelyn. This is a new topic for reps. So what was the driver for developing a book on regenerative medicine regulations?
Well, I think the main driver is that it's ever changing, and there's always new regulations coming out regarding, cellular tissues, gene therapies, especially. And so, we wanted to try and do a topic that is really at the forefront right now of regulators and of regulatory affairs. It's not an easy topic, but it is one that the regulators are looking at regulations now for it in different countries and different areas. and things are evolving. So we thought it would be a really good topic to have as a book.
Okay. Can you tell us the significance or importance of the countries and regions that we covered in the book?
Well, I think the biggest importance is we tried to cover as many regions as possible. As Bill was saying, there were other regions we were hoping to get authors for, but it's really hard to get people who have the expertise who also will write. Some people just don't believe they can write, so they were hesitant or did not agree to author any chapters. We would have loved to have had other areas covered, but we covered as many areas we possibly could, and we covered as many countries as we possibly could with the authors that we were able to find and that volunteered to author chapters.
Okay, thanks, Jocelyn.
Sure.
Mo, you actually worked on chapters 7 and 8. And your chapters covered special consideration for cell-based advanced therapies and establishing manufacturing controls. Can you talk about some of the special considerations discussed in chapter 7 and why these were important to include?
Sure. Thanks, Gloria. I think, I worked at FDA for about 9 years, and I think most of what is included in chapter 7 and also chapter 8 is really deals with the unique aspect of cell and gene therapy broadly. We have a very diverse product in this space, unlike biotech product and small molecule product. These products include like in vivo gene therapy, gene editing products, cellular products, as discussed in chapter 7, gene modified cells, etc. And regulatory, framework is really based on risk and benefit analysis with respect to each product and their characteristic. And so that's why it's so complex in this space to deal with regulatory consideration. So some of the challenges for cellular products obviously has been donor to donor variability and as well as quality of material. These products, cellular products, cannot be sterile filtered. They cannot undergo a viral reduction step. And they have to be manufactured aseptically, obviously. And so quality of material is a huge consideration for cellular product, unlike any other type of products. And that's why in view of all the advances, quality of material, reproducibility, the cost has become a factor. And along with it is you have to deal with technologies that is evolving every day. And new assays are being developed. Some of these assays not qualified or validated. The gene editing technologies is very advanced, and trying to catch up from the regulatory side has been a hurdle. So I talk about some of these issues. I'd be happy to go through some other challenges for cell therapy and gene therapy, but I didn't want to dominate this discussion.
Okay.
Why
don't you go ahead and give us a little peek inside the hurdles discussed in chapter 8?
Chapter 8 really deals with both cell and gene therapy and manufacturing control, essentially. It talks about, again, the clinical data being ahead of manufacturing and challenges that companies have to reproducibly manufacture product. And of course, some of it is related, some of these products are autologous, some off the shelf allogeneic, and they have different consideration. So some of the issues that are very specific to off-the-shelf products that are allogeneic is from US perspective and global perspective is donor screening and testing, which deals with the safety of the product, which is the major consideration from FDA. And there's also consideration around import export of material and where the manufacturing sites are. And the idea that in this field, essentially manufacturing and facility for manufacturing are very critical. And the fact that in some cases, there are consideration for decentralized manufacturing versus centralized. There are point of care manufacturing. So as I mentioned, because the products are unique, they come from different sources. They're delivered with different devices that are not sometimes cleared. There are a huge number of challenges that one has to face with transportation, shipping validation, etc. The assays that are used for measurement of the identity, the purity, the assays for potency critically are lacking. In fact, some of the major hurdles in BLA and approval recently has been around manufacturing. It's not so much clinical, but around showing product consistency, as Peter Marks and others have alluded to. It is very important not only to show that you can make the product during the IND phase, but you have to also show that you can make a product at commercial scale. And that has been challenging, that the scale up has been challenging. Some of the other issues regarding dealing with change, because the process is continuously changed, how to deal with these changes during the IND phase as well as post-approval. And the issue that people are challenged with are comparability, how to establish that the product is similar before and after change in view of the limited understanding sometime of the critical quality attributes and process parameters for some of these products. And so it is complex, but I think it is very important to view this in the context of the product itself. Each product has different consideration that one has to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you, Mo. Murphy, you worked on chapter 14, which focused on China. From your perspective, why was it important to include a chapter on China, and how will this chapter benefit readers?
Thanks, Gloria. Thanks for the question. I think, first of all, China is a country with, a billion of population. So there's a huge market, but from another perspective, there's a lot of patients that have unmet medical needs, and the government and the industry, the academic, spend a lot of efforts to in this area to boosting the innovation in the gene therapy and the regenerative medicines. So I think for a lot of peers working in this area, they will be very happy to know more about the China, especially the recent involvement of the China regulation and any new guideline or technology or policies that can be referenced or guided when they have a plan to develop or introduce the regenerative medicine into China market. So that's I think will be beneficial for our RMPS members.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about the evolution of cell and gene therapy regulations in China and any significant milestones that readers should be aware of?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very broad question. From my point of view, I think I can highlight several things that maybe people can take a look at or have a deeper, closer view of the content through our new book or through other channels. For example, I think the beginning of the modernization of China regulation really started in 2016. So in that time, the government have a very high level, industry instruction that they have made the commitment to really reform the entire regulation infrastructure in order to meet the needs from the Chinese people for the advanced therapy and the healthcare system. So after that, there's several working streams that working on each of the area. One of the area is the regulation structure. So on that work stream, the entire China drug registration regulation are reformed. So it's nowadays it's quite similar to the US or the EU infrastructure. So we have the National Drug Administration Authority that covered all the drug and drug related development and the marketing procedure. So you can go through the typical drug development procedure from the very beginning, like the non-clinical development, clinical development, and go to the clinical phase 1 to phase 3 study and go to the marketing approval procedure. So that's the one takeaway message for our RPS members. That's the modernized infrastructure of the Chinese regulation. You can go through the typical development for the regenerative medicines. That's a multinational clinical trial. That's will be very convenient to include China as an part of the clinical trial. And another thing is, I would say, in the 1990s, there's regenerative medicines developed as a very unique situation as advanced medical device technology. So that's something maybe different from the typical development way in US or FDA, but that's you can consider it as a, how to say, kind of investigator-initiated research or study in China, because those this is another way in parallel with the typical drug registration pathway that is leading by the hospital or the physician, that they can initiate those kind of study and get approval and through the Minister of Health. That's another authority in China that's oversight the healthcare system. Through this pathway, the gene therapy developed, you can directly go to the patient for clinical trial and then applicable for the treatment as a advanced technology, medical technology. So that's something a little bit different from the US and the EU regulation. But there's a trend that after the 2018 and the 19 drug regulation evolution, this kind pathway become more for the new projects. So people or the industry realize that the nominal drug development channel would be more preferable for this high risk development of CDG products. So that's the most impressive one I would like to share. There may be some others, but I think we can talk more, if there's an opportunity for details. Thanks.
Thank you, Murphy. I have a question from the audience. What about autologous stem cells more than minimally manipulated, cultured 12 to 14 days, and re-injected for orthopedic regenerative repair, tissue, not bone? How is FDA viewing this manufacturing? That's a question from Carol Boucher. Anyone on the panel?
Yeah, I'll step in because it says FDA. Obviously, anytime you do culturing step, is FDA considered that to be a drug product. As you know, FDA has a sort of a regulation for tissue product, which are 361, and drug product, which are 351 products. And drug products essentially are anything that more than minimally manipulated, non-homologous use, etc., which are defined tissue product. Tissue products don't have to go through approval process. They have to be registered. The manufacturer of those tissue products have to be registered. But for drug product, they have to go through the approval process. So any time you do culturing, that's more than minimal manipulation, and therefore it's a drug product.
Thank you, Mo. I have another question. Are there any particular chapters that discuss how the devices being developed for delivering the therapies should be considered in the different regions with respect to overall submission strategies and timing?
Maybe I'll jump in on that, at least to start with. There's a very good chapter, which is chapter 4 on combination products, and that's got some of that information. Other chapters, which are region specific, will or may have some discussion about devices. But I would say overall, this is an evolving area, and most regulators are still developing their points of view and their guidance as far as it relates to devices which are used for delivering therapies and how those are considered in the overall submission. Jocelyn, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Bill, I think that covers it. There's a section, as you said, in chapter 4 regarding how they're looked at as medical devices, but there really wasn't a chapter that really goes into the strategy of looking at medical devices and how they would be, that deliver the product, how they would be looked at. That information, as you said, may be in some of the regional chapters, but it's still evolving. So it's not, we didn't have a specific chapter covering that.
Gloria, just to step in chapter 7, the delivery devices are briefly discussed. For cell and gene therapy, most delivery devices are not cleared for intended use, and they're cleared for other uses, and the manufacturer use it for delivery of cell and gene therapy. So biocompatibility assessment becomes very critical in the absence of clearance from FDA for intended use. So there are a number of things that has to be considered. In OTAT, which is the office that regulates cell and gene therapy, there's a team that focuses on devices, and that's a historical deviation from, really looking at the devices at CDRH. They internally review some of the devices during the IND phase with consult from CDRH. So I think that's a great topic. I think globally there are variation in the way devices are considered for delivery, for example. And in some cases, even in US, some of the manufacturing platforms are trying, some sponsors are trying to consider those as medical devices, but FDA considers any platform used for manufacturing so far as equipment, platforms such as Miltenyi automated manufacturing system, etc., Prodigy, and so forth. So whether something is a device or equipment, it's a good topic. And if it is a device, how it is regulated globally would be of interest. I agree.
Thank you, Mo. If I could ask participants to please put any questions in the Q&A and not in the chat, because we're monitoring the Q&A. Jocelyn, back to you in chapter 4. Can you talk a little bit about chapter 4, which covers combination products and the uniqueness of combination products that contain a HCTGP as one of the components?
Yes, thank you, Gloria. So the chapter starts with an overview, a very high level overview of combination products and how you can get your product or how you can find out the designation if you don't know it's a combination product. And then the rest of the chapter really talks about the differences in manufacturing practices per FDA's regulations for what are considered HCTPs versus if they're a device, or are they regulated as a drug or biologic, and the differences in GMPs between all of those and which ones do you have to follow for HCTPs in 1271 versus what would you have to follow if it's in 210, 211, 600, or 820. So I tried to look at it from the perspective of keeping it more focused on 1271 versus the others and defining those practices that you have to be aware that you have to follow for HCTPs, depending on how the product is regulated. So that's the gist of the combination product chapter.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. There's another question from the audience. Are there separate guidelines for combination products, also in vitro assays?
There are a lot of, FDA has released quite a few guidances on combination products, not necessarily so in vitro assays, because in vitro assays with a product would be considered a companion diagnostic, not a combination product. But they do not have a lot of guidance out on gene and cell therapies as part of combination products. It's mentioned in the combination product guidances, but not as much as other products are mentioned. So they are in there. There are a lot of new guidances for combination products. We do have a combination products book. And it does have a listing of some of those guidances, but FDA has done a pretty good job of writing more in-depth guidances about combination products because it's becoming a huge area of interest, and because they are looking at a lot of the devices that we would consider delivery devices in the past is actually, no, they're not really delivery devices, but they're part of a combination product, and so they regulate them as such.
Okay, thanks, Jocelyn.
Welcome.
I have another question from participants.
Gloria, sorry.
Yes, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something to combination. I just elaborate on it. It's very important. I think the point that was made that, for example, it used to be for delivery of cellular product into the heart and the catheter, etc., was largely considered to be a sort of a delivery device. But nowadays, as the FDA is becoming more mature, it is becoming a combination product. Now, historically at FDA, the discussion of whether something is combination product has not been early, but it comes up late during the whole product development cycle. So folks that are in that space, whether it's a delivery device, are really encouraged to have that discussion up front with FDA, because there are a number of considerations for combination product that they have to consider. And in my opinion, largely the device is ignored. The cellular product is, there is more focus on it. And the late phase, there are issues with the device side that has to be brought up, and everybody has to kind of catch up and deal with it. So a proactive early engagement would be really important when you have a device biological combinations. I'm sorry I interrupted you. But
no worries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mo. Is this book written for people who aren't RAPS professionals? What is the level of FDA knowledge expected for this publication? And I'd say, Bill, can perhaps you answer that?
Yeah, well, we certainly wrote it with the broad spectrum of regulatory and drug development people in mind. I think that it's a sort of moderate complexity, so that if you have no regulatory background, I think you might find it challenging to understand all the concepts. But I don't think you have to be a RAPS professional to benefit from the book. For example, chief medical officer of a company is going to get a lot from this, but the chief medical officer probably already has some level of familiarity with regulations around the globe.
A follow-up, another question related to that, is this book written for folks without specific FDA regulatory expertise? For example, QA, C-suite execs, researchers.
Yeah, we set the book up keeping in mind that it would be used broadly by people in the drug development field. And again, we expect some background level of knowledge, but you don't have to be an expert. And in fact, we thought that C-suite people would particularly benefit from the book, because it goes into a lot of important topics that could be showstoppers if they're not addressed up front.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Is there an overview of GMO-related requirements for clinical trials in different regions? And I guess that would be for any of you, but Bill and Jocelyn, you're familiar with all.
I'll step in,
Okay.
Gloria, and I think this is a very important topic. As you know, in US, there are no GMO regulation. In Europe, there is GMO, and there are discrepancy the way health authorities view cell and gene therapy between different regions. I'm not an expert in Europe and Asia, etc. My knowledge is limited to FDA. But FDA has much more flexible approach in this area because they understand the complexity of the product, etc. And there is no law, GMO or regulation written for cell and gene therapy product. As you know, the regulation has not changed for years and years. Cell and gene therapy products are regulated based on drug regulation, because they're all drugs, 210, 211. And on top of that, you have regulations in 600 that are biological, that was added later on. For cellular drive product, allogeneic 1271 is applicable, donor screening and testing to prevent risk of transmission of communicable diseases. And if the device is, is the component, then 800s apply, which have a QSR regulation. Regulation hasn't changed, but FDA has been very proactive interpreting those regulations in their guidance document. And you can see they are actively publishing guidance document to share with the community their best thinking. So I would say there is definite differences in the way gene therapy products are viewed globally, and that's a very important perspective to bring out.
Thanks. I would add that Chapter 9 actually does discuss GMOs in the context of distribution of regenerative medicines. So there is some discussion there.
Thank you, Mo and Bill. Bill, moving on to Chapter 10. Chapter 10 covers regenerative medicine regulation in the US. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of the US regulatory framework in this area and the significance of the 21st Century Cures Act?
Sure, thanks, Gloria. And actually, much of the history is in the history chapter, which is Chapter 2. But what I would say is when the very first regenerative medicines went to FDA, there was no reviewing division designated for these things. Some of them were even regulated as devices and still are. But FDA evolved, and eventually they created a reviewing division within CBER. But even then, they could only apply existing regulations that were written for small molecules and monoclonal antibodies. And they did a pretty good job with what they had. But you know, in advance of, and especially beginning with the 21st Century Act, legislation and guidance became available. They've written many more guidance documents since then. And I think FDA has done a great job progressing the regulations and the guidance. And today has one of the most sophisticated review systems in the world for regenerative medicines. As a final thought, I wanted to specifically thank Wilson Bryan, because as we were getting ready to start publishing the book, we sent this chapter over to Wilson to take a look at. And he said, oh, do you know about the upcoming organizational changes at FDA? And we said, no, we don't. And he was gracious enough to work with us and get us the latest organizational updates at FDA, which we were able to include in this chapter. So thanks to them for working with us on that. And it occurs to me that Mo and his tenure at FDA would have a unique perspective on the evolution as well. Mo, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. So that's great. You know, the evolution, I mean, if you think about it, what has evolved in Office of Tissue Advanced Therapy is sort of historical in a way, because you have one office that regulates all essentially ATMP, cell and gene therapy, but also tissue products in one space. And it is organized in different divisions, Division of Cellular and Gene Therapy, primarily focused on CMC part, and organizationally, there are more branches being added there. For example, tissue engineering regenerative branch was created. Laura Rickle is heading that branch now. In the gene therapy side, there are two new branches that are formed that look at gene-modified cells, et cetera. So there are branches are being created and expanded. They are hiring. The size since I left as 2.5 times now bigger. And so there are younger reviewers coming on board, and et cetera. So it is evolving, but it is very important that most of the tissue products that are regulated under 361 as well as 351 are all looked at and reviewed under same umbrella, under Office of Tissue Advanced Therapy, Wilson Bryan being the director. And you have the DCGT, which is CMC again, and then you have the DSAP, which is houses non-clinical folks as well as the clinical branches, and clinical branches have different focus, et cetera. That's the structure that has evolved. And and really well suited to deal with different products. And each reviewer has different type of expertise. Some cover gene editing, some cover gene modified cells, some cover tissue engineering product, etc. So they become specialized in the review process.
Okay, thank you, Mao. Murphy, I wanted to ask you, are you aware of any key differences or similarities in regulations from China and other regions of the world?
Thanks, Gloria. I think that's a very broad question, and because of my knowledge limited to the the regulations in the other regions, maybe some understanding of the EU and the FDA requirements. So from my perspective, I would like to share is my first impression, the important similarities that the category of the CGD products, for example, in China, we also has some major categories like the products, immunotherapies, and the stem cell products, and then the gene modifying products. So that's, I think, is uniform across the globe that will easily help people to identify the relevant guidelines and the regulations, and can, some sort of comparison between the other regions' requirements and versus China. Another thing is I want to highlight is, after the revolution of China regulation, the NMPA has established the communication procedure for consultation meetings. So that's also very similar to the US one. So you can go to the pre-IND consultation, the pre-phase 2 meeting, and pre-NDA meeting. So you use those communication opportunities to build a consensus with the authority about your development plan and study design, those kind of key questions. Maybe one difference I want to highlight is that some people may know there's a special policy we call it human generic resource protection policy in China. So that means maybe some additional request and approval procedure that may be applied for those development plans that intended to shipping China biosamples and data that may potentially contain some human gene information. So that's some the special review and approval procedure may needed. I think that's maybe some quite unique situation for China, that when foreign developers, when they consider the study and the development, they need to consider this in the loop and have sufficient lead time and efforts to do this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Murphy.
You're welcome.
Jocelyn, as a reviewer of the book, is there any one chapter, topic, or discussion that stands out in your mind? Anything really significant that you think this book brings to the forefront?
Well, I think that a lot of the books don't necessarily get in. I was really surprised by the distribution, because it's not a topic that is normally in a lot of the books, and that it's talked about in depth. And so that chapter, I thought it was different, and I thought it was important to have in the book, because it's not, like I said, it's not something that's normally discussed. And there are, of course, a lot of regulations now around in the US around distribution. And for these products in particular, there are areas that need to be looked at by companies to ensure you understand your requirements, what the requirements are, and what your responsibilities are in distributing the product. So that was one that I really thought was different and that stood out for me when I reviewed it, because I hadn't really thought about it that much. I mean, as regulatory, we're kind of looking at, if that's not your specialty, you're looking at everything that happens before that. You're not really thinking about the distribution. So that's one of the chapters that really stood out when I was doing the review.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. I have another question from the participants. Do the regional chapters contain examples of prior approvals in that region as part of the discussion?
So we actually thought about that. We thought about asking for case studies in the regional chapters, but then we realized, especially on discussion with some of the potential authors, that we were already asking them to write a lot, and that asking them to add case studies was going to really make the chapters unwieldy. So the answer is, no, generally we don't have case studies of prior approvals, but many of the chapters do make reference to specific product approvals, which can be researched further. So it points you in the right direction if you want to study that, but doesn't go into the case studies themselves.
Okay. Bill,
Gloria, can I mention a couple of things about this book as well from my perspective? Cell and gene therapy primarily, arguably is focused on rare diseases, and a lot of rare diseases are being addressed by cell and gene therapy. Patient recruitment has been very challenging globally. In fact, in order to have representation of population and have enough number of patients treated, most companies have to have a global approach. They have to consider other regional authorities in their consideration, and knowing the regulation in each region is very important. That global playbook doesn't exist anywhere else, in my opinion. I hope some of that is found in the book that you have published, and it tries to address these global differences. There are some differences, definitely. There are some differences in the way you approach the regulatory authorities, who do you go through, and so forth. FDA is a very centralized place, but not necessarily all other regions are as centralized. There are different players in each region that have to be considered in their global playbook consideration. So I think that's the important aspect of this book, has to be brought up. And it's a first attempt to really look at that global playbook that every company should have in mind going and treating rare diseases in this space.
Okay, thank you, Mo.
Thanks, Mo.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Gloria.
No,
I
go
also
ahead, please.
some comments for this question. When Ying has organized the discussion about this kind of cases when we drafted the China chapter, we realize it's very challenging because there's two reasons. First is China regulation. A lot of technical guidelines regarding the gene therapy and stem cell therapies. They're quite new. They just published in 2018 or 19. Do not really have much real approval cases available yet. That's the first thing. The second one is as Mo mentioned, there's a lot of unique situation, and a lot of developments about rare disease and some very small patient size, sample size, and the recruitment is slow. So there might be in the progress of clinical development, but do not really have very, well known and published information about those, product in the late development phase or approved products. Yeah, that maybe in the future, the next version, there will be some, cases can be shared with the members.
Right. Thank you, Murphy. Bill, back to you as a reviewer of the book. Is there any one chapter, topic, discussion that really stands out in your mind that people need to be aware of? Or you had that aha moment?
I think all the chapters are full of important insights, but one of my favorites is chapter 4 on combination products. And we talked about this already. As it turns out, many regenerative medicines are in some way a combination, either because of the equipment used to prepare the medicine, especially if it's a local preparation, or to deliver the medicine, such as the catheters. In fact, I didn't fully appreciate, some of these issues until we had some of our own experiences in this area. But the FDA, the manufacturing group, will consistently tell sponsors that where a device is involved, try to have an agreement with the device company that they're going to tell you when they will be making changes or if they plan changes to the marketing. My initial thought on that was, why bother? But it actually happens more often than you'd think, that manufacturers discontinue products, either because they want to replace them with something else, or because they're not selling enough of them, or they don't see any financial potential. And we've been burned on several occasions by that happening. So it's an important consideration. The complexities that are added with a combination product are more than just double, because you have to maintain a consistent supply of the product. The product has to, or the device has to remain the same. You need to be able to adapt to any changes that they make. And I would even extend that to consideration of in vitro diagnostics, that if you think you might need an in vitro diagnostic for your product, that being able to carry along the development of an in vitro diagnostic in parallel, especially if it's a company that you have no direct control over, can add a lot of risk to your development program.
Okay, thank you, Bill. I'm going to just open this up to the panel because we're running out of time. But Murphy, is there any one key takeaway, either from you writing your chapter on China or going through the process of being an author in a RAPS book, that you can share with participants?
Thanks, Gloria. First of all, I'm really honored to join to be an author of this book, because to be honest, after the college, I think this is the first time I spent so many times to time the can again, review and trying to authoring some of the content. So it's really a good exercise for myself. On the other side, I'm really excited that there's such a book that covering this topic from those 360 dimensions. So it's really a good handbook for people who really want to know about this topic, and could be helpful for from knowledge perspective, or even as a guide for the future work. So that's my takeaway. Thanks.
Thank you. Mo, do you have a key takeaway, either from your involvement in writing your chapter or the process of being an author in this new book?
You're muted.
Mo.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Yes. Being an author on a book, as Bill said, is very challenging because you have your day job all the time. And one of the things is whoever contributed to this book, they definitely went out of their way to contribute to the field and the better understanding and advancing cell and gene therapy in space globally. So I want to thank everybody who did that. I'm not part of a RAP's organization, but I understand that time commitment is significant. Yeah. The second part is that from my perspective, this book has, outlines the regulatory framework globally, and it's the first attempt. And I think it could be used by medical officers or person with QA, QC background, et cetera, to get some sense of the differences globally, et cetera. But the third one is what I'm interested is really about what do we do as a next step to ensure that these products are going to be commercial success. And in order for them to be commercial success, the manufacturing hurdles has to be removed. And those manufacturing hurdles I've outlined in the chapter 7 part of it and chapter 8. And I suggested what needs to be done in order to address some of those bottlenecks going forward. So I'm glad that RAPS gave me the opportunity to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mo. Jocelyn, Bill, any closing thoughts? You've both been involved in many books and led many books. So any key takeaways?
Maybe I'll just make a quick note about Japan. We didn't say much about Japan, but Japan has some really favorable regenerative medicine regulations that allow you to, in agreement with PMDA, get a conditional approval based on a very small set of data. So it could be useful for development programs that want to get their foot in the door quickly.
And we do have a chapter on Japan, so.
We do, yes.
Yes. Jocelyn, key takeaway?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's always good to have the RAPS books because you can use them. If this is your area that you're working in, you can use them as a handbook. They're readily available. They have a lot of good information. And not only that, we have the reference sections, which have the regulations, the guidances, and the links to them, which a lot of regulatory people know. You spend a lot of time looking for things on websites, regulators' websites. They may change them. You don't know where they are. The links are broken. And so a lot of that has been handled by this book. And I just think it's a really good overall look from a lot of different countries, and you don't get that in every book. So I was really happy that we could get all of the different countries that we got represented in the book. I mean, Canada, UK, the EU, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan. I mean, it's a lot, and you don't get that in one place. So I think it will be extremely useful for people who are working in this area, and I hope that they find it useful.